My name is Rob Whitbread, and welcome to Cleveland Conversations. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Marc Bona. In addition to being a prolific author of 4 books, he is the very popular feature writer for Cleveland.com, primarily covering areas such as sports entertainment, food, craft beer, and the general entertainment industry. So today we're going to be focusing on 2 specific areas which are near and dear to my heart, food and beer. So welcome, Marc.
Thanks, Rob.
So let's start by talking about the restaurant industry in Greater Cleveland. We're 1, 2, 3 years post-COVID, post-pandemic, depending on how you want to look at things. And we all know that shutdown was very, very challenging for the industry. So could you talk a little bit about how you would characterize where the food restaurant industry is in Cleveland today?
Yeah, I would say it's on the recovery path, but definitely by no means fully recovered. I was speaking with Lori Torres recently of Mallorca. She runs a great restaurant in downtown Cleveland, and she made a point just a couple months ago, and she said, you know, we're not seeing the signs we used to see on storefronts, restaurant fronts all the time saying, wanted dishwasher, $15 an hour. That was a dime a dozen. So we've really come out of that. But on a similar token, I think it still is an industry that is struggling. It has, COVID really threw an economic gut punch into small businesses in general, but especially restaurants. I mean, their profit margins are so thin to begin with. You throw in something like COVID, and it just makes it exponentially tougher.
Mm-hmm. And how are they managing these challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's all about money. The cost went up because of supply chain issues, as everyone knows, and they had to raise prices. But how you raise prices is really, we're a capitalistic society, we're supply and demand, and at a certain point, consumers might at some point just say no and stop going out. We have not hit that point, but it is more expensive. Everybody feels this. I think at every sector of the restaurant industry, whether it's fast casual, whether it's fine dining, it doesn't matter. So prices have gone up. I remember at the heart of COVID, restaurant owners were telling me, this is killing us because for whatever reason, one commodity that was absolutely killing them were chicken wings, of all things. And they just could not sell chicken wings cheaply. And people are used to cheap chicken wings and beer at a sports bar. And that was a problem. So prices are going up. Restaurants are trying to find a way to cover up those prices. And it's been a tough road. I don't want to say it's leveled off because we still have some economic issues going on.
Mm-hmm. And in your experience, are you seeing that there's the inner city restaurants, say in the Cleveland downtown area, are experiencing more difficulties relative to suburbs? Are you seeing suburbs are recovering more quickly perhaps? Are there any dynamics that you see along those lines?
I don't know if I could say one is healthier than the other, but I do think, as we all saw, COVID really created a domino effect as soon as the shutdown hit in March of 2020. So when there's no entertainment and no sports, there are no people going out to restaurants at night and not going out to bars and places like that. Then you had people starting the work from home aspect, and they weren't going out for lunches. So downtown, I think, was slower to come back, and I think that's the reason. I think it's more economics than it is quality by any chance. But you're seeing openings and closings, I think, fairly consistently between the suburbs and city center.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you. Let me shift gears slightly. We in Cleveland are blessed with some wonderful world-class restaurateurs, entrepreneurs, Zach Brule being one of them, Karen Small being another. And these are incredibly talented, incredibly gifted people. But they're also have been on the front lines of managing their businesses, managing their circumstances. When you speak with folks such as this, in these sort of higher end, more niche type restaurants, what are the things they're talking to you about?
Yeah, this is interesting because I think they, really like any other restaurant owner who we may not even know or the public doesn't know, are all looking for that sweet spot. They all want to find what is the sweet spot. So that means both the culinary aspect that they're going, the culinary focus they're going after, really, as well as the expansion and smart growth. How much growth is too much? I mean, we've seen some expansions that have just been retracted. You and I were talking before the show. Mabel's Barbecue in Woodmere have been closed for several months temporarily, and recently this week it became a permanent thing. And that is a restaurant that downtown is absolutely filled and doing very well. So you've got this balance situation going on, but I do think they have the same types of issues that a lot of other small business owners have. What they do have is name cachet, and I think that really helps them. And we have some very good restaurant owners as well as restaurants throughout Northeast Ohio. It's going to be interesting to see the future and where this goes.
And are you seeing, like, Chef Small, she recently had to close a restaurant because the terms, very widely publicized, the terms of a lease changed. Is that something that, again, is there an underlying dynamic as the COVID recovery is coming in? Is this just another pressure point as far as physical locations go? Are these folks experiencing some of these difficulties?
Yeah, this all goes to human relationships. I mean, if you have a landlord who's willing to work with the restaurant owner, and the restaurant owner says, "Look, could you cut us some slack here on the lease, on the rents?" It would. Sometimes it happens, and they work something out, and sometimes it doesn't. But at the end of the day, if that price doesn't come down, and the restaurant owner really needs a break, I mean, push comes to shove, and then restaurants close. It's just that simple. The future of where we're going, though, is going to be very, very interesting. I spoke with Alton Brown, the Food Network star, about a year ago, and I asked him the question because he's a celebrity chef of sorts, and he's very much involved in the industry, and he thinks there's always a place for fine dining, but he thinks that it's going to be fewer occurrences of going out. So somebody who may have gone out once a week to fine dining may pull back and say, we're going to go out once a month and then just shoot the moon at that point. And Cleveland, as you know, has Rocco Whalen just opened Fahrenheit a few months ago, and by far that was the hot restaurant of 2023. It's doing well. Cordelia opened on East 4th the year earlier. That was the hot restaurant of the year. Vinny Cimino is doing a wonderful job as the chef there. So we still have that level working. So it's a long road back, but I think they're looking for that sweet spot. They're looking for that niche.
And let's talk a little bit more about something you mentioned. We can't talk about the restaurant food industry in Cleveland without mentioning the celebrity chef phenomenon. Michael Simon, Jonathan Sawyer, you mentioned some other folks. There's been great successes, but there's also been some pretty well-publicized failures and closures as well. Can you talk a little bit about what your take is on this dynamic? What happens with the balancing act of being recognized celebrity and drawing time away versus nuts and bolts of running restaurants?
Yeah, I talk to a lot of restaurant owners, and they always are, and it's true for brewery owners too, they're always so fast to credit their team. It's just like talking to a star athlete after a game, and they're always crediting the team. Some of that may be bunk, but a lot of it is real. So they have to have a really good team in place, because if you're stretched too thin and you don't live here and you're out doing TV shows and you're out doing other things, you really have to rely on your team in place that much more. But I think they're beholden to the same economic challenges that everybody else is. Now, I know in the case of Mabel's Barbecue, which is a Simon Doug Pekovich venture, they decided to close that down. Doug is concentrating on Heritage Steakhouse and Whiskey, which is almost not next door, but on the same block. So they have to pick their challenges or pick their triumphs as it is. So I do think that the celebrity chefs, they have the same types of, I mean, they have her name, and that's great, but they have the same types of challenges as a lot of other chefs.
Excellent. And now I'm going to ask you to shift gears rather abruptly into a topic area that's near and dear to my heart, which is the craft beer industry in the greater Cleveland area. Sometimes people may not appreciate the size and scope of this industry, so depending on the source you may look at, there's somewhere between 50 to 90 craft breweries in the greater Cleveland area. You're talking about economic impacts that are estimated over $200 million. Recently in 2022, Ohio was identified as the 6th ranked state in craft beer production. Pretty substantial contributions. What I'm going to ask you to talk about is sort of, call it the softer side of things, if you will. So like Pat and Dan Conway with Great Lakes Brewing, Sam McNulty and his contributions to Ohio City, the role that this industry has played in spurring economic development, neighborhood revitalization.
Yeah, this is funny because we're talking, and I like to have a beer or two before dinner. So we're flipping the role here. We're talking food first and then beer, and that's great. Beer is near and dear to my heart. I've been covering it for over a decade because it is an industry, because it has direct economic effect on Northeast Ohio, and you hit some of the high points. So the very quick, brief history of beer that has a lot to do about why we're talking about this is, like a lot of places, in the middle of the 1800s, a lot of immigrants came here. Many to Northeast Ohio were of German extract, and they came and they were used to making lagers. We didn't have all the different crazy styles we have now. They knew how to make beer, they made beer, and the mom and pop breweries sprouted up all over the place. Quintessential American success story. They were gobbled up by just a couple of very large corporations. And for a very brief time, for only about 3 years, in the early to mid 1980s, Cleveland actually had 0 breweries. So whenever I talk about this, I always tell people to envision an hourglass. We started at the top with a lot of breweries. We funneled into the 1980s. And then, as you said, Pat and Dan Conway came along. They opened Great Lakes Brewing Company in 1988. This was important for a couple of reasons. Cleveland did not have a brewery, and it became a harbinger for, nobody knew it at the time, but it became a harbinger for more economic impact in the area. And we've now gone back out to a wide berth, and we have, right now, we're around 430 plus breweries. The very first day Pat and Dan opened, they're of course located right in the heart of Ohio City. The neighborhood then was not like it is now. The reason why it has revitalized is because of that brewery. The very first day, Pat and Dan drove their wives, 1988. They were very proud. They had just signed the deed to the land, to the building at their father's law office. They come around the corner, proud husbands, proud brothers, and what do they see? 25 drunks in the street throwing haymakers at each other. And Jean Conway, who was a wonderful woman and very smart and very sharp, turned to her husband and said, "What do you guys have, the IQ of a couple of artichokes?" and that put things in perspective. They took off from there. We can have a whole other show talking about Dortmunder Gold. That really put them on the map. And there's a lot of history there. So that was really the big thing. But in the last decade, we're seeing the next chapter, that Sam McNulty coming along. You had a great line. He owns about half of Ohio City at this point. A Nano Brew, Market Garden Brewery, the production facility behind, Brightside across the street, Bird of Paradise, all of that is his and part of his ownership team. He is the first person to credit the Conways because his mantra has been rising tides lift all boats. And that's exactly what's going on in Ohio City. And then the ripple effect trickled out from there.
Yeah, that's excellent. If you could talk a little bit about, because one thing that's always struck me about this particular industry is, whilst there is fierce competition at times for things like shelf space in supermarkets, tap lines in bars, things of that nature, there's also almost an esprit de corps, or a level of cooperation amongst the industry, which you see in things such as charitable events. You see in things such as helping one another out at different times in different ways. Could you talk about that? What are some of your favorite charitable events? What are some of your favorite things you see in that area?
That's a great point. You're 100% correct. Esprit de corps is just fantastic between the brewers. Part of the reason I do cover the industry I mentioned was economics. It really is an industry. But part of it also is simply the fact that there's not a lot of gossip. There's not a lot of backstabbing. I'm not interested in covering that. My favorite quick story is years and years ago, Luke Purcell, who's the former brewer at Great Lakes, is now at Collision Bend. He was having a problem with a valve on his equipment, and he called Andy Tavikram of Market Garden, which is about 200 feet away, and he said, Andy, can you help me with this? He's calling a direct competitor, so to speak. Andy comes down and he looks at it and he goes, yeah, I can help you. I'm the one who installed it. They helped each other. That does not happen in most businesses anywhere on this planet, so I really appreciate that. Coupled with that, or paired with that, as you mentioned, there's a charitable component. Brewers are asked constantly from charities could you donate a keg? Can you do this? Can you do that? They donate, they get involved in causes, they carve off proceeds from sales of their pints and cans. That happens all the time. Probably the most internal and important charitable connection with brewing is Winter Warmer Fest is by far, I think, the best beer fest in Ohio. It's held every March in Windows on the River in downtown in the Flats. And it's important because it's a fundraiser for the OCBA, the Ohio Craft Brewers Association. That is the lobbying arm that represents the interest of the brewers in the state. So now you've got the money kind of recirculating and coming back in. That's a really important thing.
And following up on that, talk a little bit about the breadth and scope. Like, I live in the general area of where Working Class Brewery is located. Avon Lake, East Lake. Just the growth, not just in Ohio City and downtown Cleveland, but the regional greater Cleveland area, what you've seen with that.
Yeah, very, very important. Basically, years ago, you had corner bars. I think when you and I were both 100 years ago, when we were younger, you had corner bars. That was it. Everything has changed. The demographic has changed. And breweries are no longer a corner bar in a city. They're corner bars in neighborhoods. And they're not staying open as late as the old-fashioned corner bar. They're way more family focused. There's a lot of places I walk in, you'll find board games. They're really catering to kids. They want mom and dad to maybe have a pint or two. The kids can play a game. There's trivia nights. Sometimes they bring in music. They're all looking to do more than just have someone belly up and have a beer or two. Some of these places, there's a big argument going on about whether they want TVs or not. Do you want to watch sports or do you want to force a conversation? So and then there's been lots of studies that basically say these are good for neighborhoods. And it is a destination. It's a high-end point. People love, if you love craft beer, you'll hit one, you'll find another in the neighborhood, you'll hit that as well.
That's great. Now, I also have to ask, there have been some relatively recent closures, different situations that emerged, the most probably widely publicized being the platform situation. What's your opinion on where, if we hit saturation point, if we hit a peak and are starting to decline in this area, what's your take? You have as good a feel for this industry as anyone does. What's your take on that?
I think there's a double-edged sword going on. When a brewery closes, I always try to find out the reason for the closure. And if 5 breweries close in a year and there's 5 different reasons, to me that's not alarming. Those are personal decisions. They close for whatever reason. On the other hand, the breweries are fighting a big challenge right now, and that's changing demographics in 2 ways. You have younger drinkers who are not gravitating to beer the way maybe somebody our age years ago did. People are really into these RTDs, ready-to-drink canned cocktails, but then you also have the non-drinkers. So right now, what's been kind of sort of holding steady, maybe dipping just a smidgen, the craft brewery share in this country is around 13%. That means 87% of the beer being consumed in this country are one of the macros, your Anheuser-Busch's, the Budweisers, Molson Coors, and things like that. It's going to be interesting. I always look at that market share to see where it's going. You mentioned platform. That was an odd situation because Anheuser-Busch several years ago decided to create a craft division. They own about a dozen craft breweries, very highly selective about which ones they bought. Platform was the only one in the state that they bought. And then within a few years, I think they realized that there were some issues, it wasn't working out, and they really pared that company to where it's just bare bones. I think they're still making just 3 beers, and they used to make scores and scores of beers. I think that may have been part of the reason why that happened. They had too many out there.
And what about these hard seltzers, these hard lemonades, these ciders, these various offshoots, if you will? Are you seeing the, let's call them for lack of a better term, traditional craft beer folks starting to diversify into some of those things?
Yeah, you started to see that with two drinks in particular, seltzers and ciders. Craft breweries started to do it, sometimes one and sometimes both. The hard lemonade is out there. This, to me, falls under the RTDs, the ready-to-drink cocktails, things like that. Some breweries are even doing things like that, or the larger ones may create a small division to try to go after this market. It's going to be interesting. I think that demographics by generation shift. You know, my generation came up drinking cheap beer. We didn't have, I mean, I was coming up right when I was a beer drinker right when craft brewing was starting. And you just see kind of a roller coaster. I don't think it's good or bad. I mean, it's something that you have to, if you're in the industry, you've just got to react to it, and brewers are really trying to do that right now.
And last question. Let's bring this two topics together to wrap things up. So the food industry, the restaurant industry, the craft beer industry, you've got certainly synergies. Some places are running full restaurants as well as their craft beer brewing. Other places have brought private different people in to run operations in their places. Some place craft beers have nothing to do with food. What's your take on how this all is operating? Is this a good idea? Where's it been successful? Where has it not worked out so well?
Well, one thing is the breweries themselves, and I give them a lot of credit. They recognized this a long time ago that they were not going to be, as we said earlier, a corner bar. They're going to offer more. They're going to have games and other events, but they also wanted to offer food. Most craft breweries offer very good food. Now it's become a dining option as well as drinking. You can go to a place, even the passport programs to get people out to go to different breweries. You don't have to buy a beer. You can buy merchandise, you can buy dinner, things like that. I like the synergy between a good restaurant and a good brewery. I think there's something to be had there. I absolutely love it. You expect when you go into a brewery to get a flight if you want. I love trying different beers. I also like doing that in a restaurant. I think restaurants should be able to serve, more and more good restaurants should serve flights. I want to try 4 different short samples and then pick my favorite and have a pint with that. So I think there's opportunity for synergy there. And it also helps kind of cross-promotional branding between the two. The restaurant can promote a local brewery. People like to stay local, drink local, consume local, and the same goes the other way as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, again, thank you, Marc, for joining us and educating us with your vast knowledge of this industry. You're a local treasure as far as your knowledge of both the specifics as well as the macro dynamics of this area. Be sure to read Marc's work in cleveland.com. He also is a regular guest on WTAM Radio. And thanks to all of you for watching this episode of Cleveland Conversations.